When I was 17, my mom stood by while her husband kicked me out with nothing but a torn duffel bag and $50. Now, years later, she shows up crying on my doorstep, begging for help. It happened on a cold night in November. Rain poured so hard it felt like needles on my skin. I was standing on the porch, clutching my backpack, trying to understand what was happening. Ronald, my stepdad, had that same smug look he always wore when he wanted to feel powerful. He opened the door wide and threw my small suitcase out onto the wet ground. "You're done here," he said. "I'm not feeding someone who doesn't respect my rules." I turned to my mom, just hoping, she'd speak up for me. She didn't. She stood there in her robe, her arms crossed tight over her chest, eyes fixed on the floor. "Mom," I whispered, "please say something." But she didn't look at me. Not once. Ronald barked again for me to leave, and that was it. The door slammed shut. The sound of that door closing felt louder than the thunder. I stood there for a while, staring at the small light glowing from inside the house. That was the home I grew up in. My room was still upstairs, my books still on the shelf, my life still inside. But I wasn't welcome anymore. I picked up my soaked suitcase and walked down the street, the rain mixing with the tears I tried to hide. I drove my old car to the grocery store parking lot on the edge of town. It smelled like damp paper and old fries. I curled up in the back seat, wrapping my thin jacket tighter around me. My hands were shaking from the cold and from anger. I kept replaying what happened, trying to understand how a mother could let that happen to her own child. That night, I promised myself one thing. I'd never need them again. I'd never ask for help, never give them another chance to hurt me. I didn't know how, but I was going to make something of myself. I was going to prove that I could survive, even if I had no one. The rain finally stopped around midnight. The sound of it dripping off the roof was the only thing I could hear. I stared up at the car ceiling, trying to ignore the ache in my stomach. $50. A duffel bag. No home. That's all I had. But I still had my will, and somehow, that felt like more than anything they'd ever given me. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, whispering into the darkness, "You'll regret this one day." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The mornings always started the same. I woke up stiff and cold in the back seat of my car, brushed my teeth in a gas station bathroom, and drove to school before anyone noticed me. I didn't tell anyone where I lived. I just kept my head down and tried to look normal. After classes, I went straight to the small diner off the highway where I worked evenings. The smell of coffee and fried eggs followed me everywhere, but I didn't mind. It was warm, and the people there didn't ask questions. The first few weeks were hard. I was always tired, trying to balance schoolwork and the late shifts at the diner. My grades started to slip, and there were nights I wanted to give up. But every time I thought about my mom and Ronald, something inside me tightened. I refused to let them be right about me. I wasn't weak. I wasn't useless. One night, the head waitress, Ellis Ward, noticed me dozing off during break. She was in her late 40s, kind eyes, gray streaks in her hair, and the kind of voice that made you feel safe. She asked if I was okay. I lied, said I was fine, just tired from studying. She didn't believe me. The next day, she left a sandwich and a thermos of soup on the counter with my name on it. No one had done something like that for me in a long time. A week later, after a late closing shift, Ellis offered to give me a ride. I panicked and said no, but she followed me outside and saw me unlock my car door. She didn't say anything right away. She just looked at me for a long moment, then quietly said, "You can't sleep out here, sweetheart." Not anymore. I wanted to argue, but the truth broke something in me. I nodded. That night, I slept in the spare room of her small apartment above a laundromat. The sheets smelled like lavender detergent, and I cried before falling asleep. Not because I was sad, but because it had been so long since I felt safe. Ellis never asked for details. She just said, "You don't owe me an explanation. Just promise me you'll keep going." I kept that promise. I worked harder than ever. I saved every dollar I could, even skipped meals some days to add a little more to my jar. I studied during breaks, memorizing notes while refilling coffee cups. One evening, I bought a small notebook from the dollar store. On the front, I wrote one word in black marker: freedom. Inside, I started listing goals: finish school, get a real job, find a place of my own. Every time I felt like giving up, I opened that notebook and read the first line I'd written: never need them again. Each day felt like climbing out of a hole, but for the first time, I believed I could make it to the top. I couldn't believe it when I got the scholarship to the state university. All my hard work had finally paid off, and it felt like a door had opened to a future I had only dreamed about. When I got the news, part of me wanted to call home, but I knew it would only stir up the same old anger. Valerie tried to reach me, leaving messages that she missed her daughter, but I didn't answer. I couldn't. Not now. Not when I had a chance to change my life. College was a different world, and I felt both nervous and excited. I threw myself into my studies, determined to learn everything I could about business. I wanted to build a life where I could stand on my own, where no one could hold power over me. Every lecture, every assignment, every project became a step toward that life. I spent long nights reading textbooks and taking notes, imagining myself succeeding and never having to depend on anyone again. I also got a part-time job at a coffee shop. It wasn't glamorous, but I needed the money, and it helped me feel independent. I learned to balance school and work, juggling shifts with classes and assignments. Sometimes I was exhausted, but I kept telling myself that it was worth it. My anger at being treated unfairly became my fuel. Every time I felt it creeping up, I turned it into determination. I refused to let my past mistakes or other people's expectations control me. There were moments when I felt lonely, missing home in ways I couldn't explain. But I knew that answering calls or going back to old patterns would only slow me down. I wanted to focus on me, on building a future that was mine. I reminded myself every day that one day I wouldn't need anyone else. I would be strong, successful, and self-reliant. That thought carried me through long mornings and late nights. I made friends slowly, people who shared my goals or respected my space. I learned to trust myself more than anyone else. I discovered parts of me I never knew existed. The discipline, the patience, and the quiet strength that came from pushing through hard days. Every success, no matter how small, felt like a victory. By the end of the semester, I realized that this scholarship had given me more than education. It had given me freedom, the freedom to define my own life and my own worth. I was no longer just Harper, the girl stuck in a home full of rules and anger. I was Harper, a young woman carving her path, determined to never depend on anyone again. My dream of college had become my dream of independence, and I wasn't going to let anything stop me. I knew the journey was just beginning, but for the first time, I felt like I was truly on my own side. For years flew by faster than I could imagine. College had been tough, but I pushed through every challenge. I studied hard, worked long hours at the coffee shop, and kept reminding myself that I was building my future. All that effort paid off when I graduated at the top of my class. Holding my diploma felt like proof that I had survived, grown, and refused to be broken. Not long after, I landed a job at a small tech startup. At first, I was nervous. The office was full of smart, driven people, and I worried I wouldn't measure up. But I soon realized that I could hold my own. I worked late, learned fast, and trusted my instincts. My sharp intuition and commitment started to get noticed. My boss, Grant Harlow, saw something in me that even I hadn't fully recognized. He began to guide me, giving advice and opportunities that helped me grow. I felt grateful for his mentorship, but I never let it make me dependent. Even as I focused on my job, I found time to start a consulting firm on the side. It was small at first, almost nothing, but every client and project built my confidence and my independence. I liked seeing the results of my own hard work, knowing I was creating something that belonged only to me. The feeling of slowly rising on my own was intoxicating. I felt stronger, smarter, and more capable than I had ever imagined. Meanwhile, calls from Valerie kept coming. At first, I thought I might answer, but her voice, full of guilt and empty apologies, reminded me of the past I wanted to leave behind. The calls became more frequent and desperate, but I didn't pick up. I had moved on, and I knew that reconnecting with her would only shake the foundation I had built for myself. By the time I looked around, I realized how far I had come. I had gone from a scared, angry girl to a confident woman who could stand on her own. I had work I loved, a business I was building, and mentors who believed in me, but most importantly, I had my independence. I had risen from everything that once tried to hold me down. For the first time, I understood what it truly meant to take control of my life. Nothing and no one could stop me now. I was ready for whatever came next, and I knew I would face it on my own terms. Rising from the ashes wasn't easy, but it was worth every struggle. One quiet afternoon, I was working on a project for my consulting firm when an email popped up in my inbox. It was from an old neighbor I hadn't heard from in years. I clicked it without thinking, But as I read, my heart skipped a beat. My mom and stepdad had lost their house. Ron had been fired for stealing from his company, and now they were completely broke. I couldn't believe it at first. I read the email twice, hoping I had misunderstood, but the words were clear. They had fallen hard, and there was nothing I could do to change it. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange mix of relief and calm. It wasn't that I wanted them to fail, but I had built my life by walking my own path, and theirs had been very different. I had worked hard for my independence, and I reminded myself that everyone has to face the consequences of their choices. No one else could control the paths they had taken. That night, I had a dream I couldn't shake. I saw my mother standing at a door, her face quiet and still. She wasn't speaking. She wasn't moving. Behind her, I saw Ron, angry and bitter, shoving her out. The image was haunting, but it didn't make me sad in the way I thought it would. Instead, it reminded me of everything I had escaped from. I had left that chaos behind, and I had worked too hard to let it pull me back in. I woke up with the dream still vivid in my mind. For a moment, I thought about reaching out, but I shook my head. I had no reason to involve myself in the aftermath of their decisions. I had my own life to live, my own goals to chase, and my independence to protect. I knew that they had made their choices, and now they had to live with the results. As the morning sunlight filled my apartment, I felt a sense of closure. I had faced the past, and I had survived it. Their downfall did not bring me anger or satisfaction. It was simply a reminder that life is full of consequences, and each person must face their own. I had risen above the struggles of my youth, and nothing could take that from me. I was stronger, wiser, and ready to keep moving forward, leaving the past where it belonged. I told myself firmly, they made their choices, and I had made mine. Now it was time to focus entirely on the life I had built, on the future I was still shaping, and on the person I had become. I had just finished a long day at the consulting firm when I walked up to my apartment and saw her. Valerie was sitting on the steps outside my door, her face pale and wet from tears. She looked smaller somehow, thinner and older than I remembered, and my chest tightened at the sight. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The memories of everything she had done, the yelling, the threats, the nights I cried alone, came rushing back, and it was hard to believe this was the same woman who had sent me away. "Honey, please, we have nowhere to go," she said, her voice trembling. I stared at her, frozen. She looked desperate, broken, and it was almost enough to make me feel something for her again, but I quickly pushed it aside. I had spent years building my life, and I wasn't about to let old pain control me. She kept talking, trying to explain herself. She said she hadn't wanted to kick me out back then, that she had been afraid of Ron. Her words sounded weak to me. I had heard excuses like that before, and they never changed anything. Yet something in her tone made me pause. There was fear, regret, and maybe even guilt hidden in those words. I finally stepped forward and unlocked the door. "Come in," I said, my voice calm but cold. I made sure my tone stayed formal, distant, the way it should be. I wasn't letting emotions rule me. She followed me inside, still crying quietly, and I led her to the small living room. She sank onto the couch as if it were a throne, looking around nervously, waiting for me to soften, but I didn't. "Not yet. I just need to stay, just for a while," she said, voice breaking. Her words hung in the air, fragile and pleading. I nodded slightly, letting her know she could stay, but I made no promises beyond that. I needed her to understand that this wasn't forgiveness, that she wasn't back in control. She had come to me now, begging, after years of pushing me away. The roles had reversed, and I was the one holding the power. I walked to the window, looking out at the city lights, feeling the weight of years of hurt and resilience behind me. She would stay, but on my terms. I would decide how long, how much, and how involved she would be. The past was back at my door, yes, but I was ready. I had survived, I had grown, and now I was the one in charge. Valerie's tears would not change that. Valerie stayed in my apartment longer than I had expected. At first, I tried to keep things simple, letting her rest and settle in. But soon, old habits I thought I had left behind began to surface. She started making comments about everything, my clothes, the way I organized my apartment, even the hours I worked. "You spend too much time at that job," she said one evening, frowning at my stack of papers. "Don't you think you should relax more? You're working yourself too hard." I felt my patience tighten. I had built this life carefully, and her words were like knives cutting through my peace. She didn't stop there. Valerie began asking for money. First, it was small things like medicine she said she needed. Then she mentioned Ron, claiming he needed help. "Just until we get back on our feet," she said, eyes wide and pleading. My stomach twisted. I had seen this pattern before. I knew that giving her money would not fix anything. It would only open the door to more demands. I took a deep breath and told her no. Her reaction was immediate. Her eyes filled with tears and her voice shook. "Harper, you've changed," she said, her tone full of sorrow and disappointment. "You used to care about family. How can you just turn your back now?" I felt a sting, not because I cared what she thought, but because her words dug at memories I had worked hard to bury. The anger, the hurt, the years I had spent proving myself, all of it came rushing back. I stayed calm, though my mind raced. I knew she was trying to manipulate me, to make me feel guilty for protecting myself. I reminded myself of every time she had hurt me, of every night I had cried alone, of every choice I had made to survive. I had built my life from nothing, and I would not let anyone take it from me, not even my mother. Even as she wept, I refused to give in. I explained that I had responsibilities, that I couldn't hand over money or let her control my life again. I reminded her that independence was something I had fought for, something I had earned. She paused, her voice softening for a moment, but I could see the old habits lurking behind her eyes. The guilt trip was her weapon, and I had to stay strong. Days passed, and the tension remained. Valerie continued to linger, criticizing and pushing, testing how much she could bend me. But I refused to react like I once had. Every comment, every plea, was met with quiet firmness. I had learned my worth, and I refused to let anyone, even her, undermine it. By the end of the week, I realized something important. I could love my family, but I didn't have to let them control me. I could be kind without being weak. I could care without being used. And most importantly, I could stand my ground, protecting the life I had built. The manipulation had returned, but I was ready. I would not fall for it again. I had started to feel the weight of Valerie's constant presence, her complaints, and her endless requests. One afternoon, I called Ellis, the woman who had helped me when I had nowhere to go, just to talk. She had always been honest with me, and I needed clarity. After a few questions, the truth came out. Ron wasn't sick at all. He hadn't been sick for a long time. Instead, he had been gambling, drinking, and wasting what little money they had left. And the worst part, Valerie had known all along. She had lied to me, pretending everything was an emergency, while she stayed silent about Ron's actions. I felt my chest tighten. Anger, disappointment, and betrayal all surged at once. Years of hurt and patience came rushing back. I couldn't believe how much I had given, how much I had allowed her to manipulate me, and all the while she had hidden the truth. I realized then that the situation wasn't about helping family. It had never been about that. It had been about control, lies, and her own fear of losing her comfort. That evening, I waited until she returned home. Valerie didn't notice my tension at first. I watched her as she tried to speak, her face soft and pleading, but I stopped her. I asked her to sit, and then I told her what I had learned from Ellis. I saw her expression change, her eyes widen, and her face pale. She tried to explain, but I could hear the hesitation in her voice. Finally, she broke down. She cried, sobbing, and admitted everything. She confessed that she had never really fought for me because she didn't want to lose her marriage. She said she had been afraid of Ron, afraid of losing him, and so she had stayed silent while I suffered. Her words tumbled out in a rush, desperate and ashamed. I listened, but I didn't say a word. My silence was heavier than any shout could have been. I felt a coldness settle over me, a wall between us that nothing could break. When she finished, I stood up slowly, looking at her with a calm I had never felt before. "Leave my home," I said, my voice steady and firm, "and never come back." I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just told her what she needed to hear. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger would have been wasted energy. I was done. Her choices, her lies, and her fear had nothing to do with me now. Valerie sobbed and begged, but I didn't move. I turned away and went to my apartment, closing the door behind me. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. I had finally confronted the truth. I had finally set boundaries. I had learned that love didn't mean accepting lies or betrayal. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, feeling a strange mix of relief and clarity. I knew I had made the right decision. My home was mine, my life was mine, and no one would ever manipulate or control me again. I had faced the past, uncovered the lies, and chosen myself. And that choice felt more powerful than anything I had ever done. Months passed, and life slowly began to settle into a rhythm I could control. My consulting firm was growing faster than I had ever imagined. Every new client, every successful project, made me feel stronger and more confident. I could finally see the results of all the years I had worked hard, fought, and refused to give up. My life was no longer dictated by anyone else's mistakes or fears. I was free, independent, and fully in charge of my own path. With the money I had saved, I bought a small house. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, completely mine. Walking through the rooms for the first time, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known before. I painted the walls the colors I liked, arranged the furniture the way I wanted, and even hung a few pictures that made me smile. For the first time, I had a place that reflected me, my choices, and my hard work. It was more than a house. It was proof that I had built a life from nothing, and it felt amazing. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some mail, I found a letter with my name written in careful handwriting. It was from Valerie. My heart paused for a moment, but I took a deep breath before opening it. Inside, she apologized. She wrote that she had left Ron and was now living in a shelter. Her words were full of regret, but there was no plea, no manipulation, just honesty. I read it slowly, feeling a strange mix of pity and peace. I couldn't ignore the suffering she was in, but I also knew this was not my burden to carry. I had already protected myself and built the life I wanted. I held the letter for a long moment, thinking about the years of struggle, pain, and growth. I thought about how far I had come, how strong I had become, and how much I had learned about boundaries and self-respect. My anger had faded, replaced by a quiet understanding. I didn't need to respond. I didn't need to reopen old wounds or allow her back into my life. Carefully, I placed the letter in a box labeled Past. It felt symbolic, like closing a chapter that had caused me so much pain, but had also shaped me into the person I was now. I shut the box and put it away, feeling lighter, freer. It was finally time to fully embrace the life I had worked so hard to create. That night, I sat in my new home, looking around at the space I had made for myself. I felt proud, calm, and content. The past was behind me, and I had chosen to leave it there. My life was my own, and I would continue to build it without fear or regret. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. Years had passed, and life had settled into a rhythm I was proud of. My company was growing, my small house felt like a sanctuary, and I had finally found the independence I had longed for. I rarely thought about Valerie, except when memories flickered in my mind. I had built a life on my own, and I had no reason to look back. One afternoon, I was walking out of a grocery store, carrying a bag of groceries, when something made me stop. There she was, Valerie. She was slumped near the entrance, her clothes worn and dirty, holding out a hand for change. Her hair was unkempt, and her face showed lines of worry and exhaustion I had never seen before. She looked smaller, weaker, completely different from the mother I remembered. Our eyes met, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. I could see recognition, shame, and desperation in her gaze. She whispered my name, her voice shaky, almost pleading. I felt a flicker of old memories, the anger, the pain, the years of being ignored and mistreated. But I didn't let them control me. I looked at her quietly and said, "Now you know what it feels like to be left with nothing." My voice was steady, calm, and cold. Not mean, but firm. It was a truth she had never understood until now. She said nothing, just stared at me, and I could see her face register the weight of her own choices. Without another word, I turned and walked to my car. I carried the groceries inside, placed them on the passenger seat, and started the engine. I didn't feel happiness, and I didn't feel anger. I just felt free. For years, I had carried the scars of her actions, her lies, and her selfishness. But that moment, seeing her helpless and broken, reminded me of how far I had come and how strong I had become. I drove off, watching the city fade behind me. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold. The world seemed quiet, peaceful, as if giving me space to breathe and reflect. I thought about everything I had endured, all the struggles, the hard work, and the choices I had made. I had built my life on my own, and no one could ever take that from me. For the first time in a long time, I smiled, not because of revenge or anger, but because I was free. I had made something of myself. I had survived, grown, and thrived without their help, without their love when I needed it most. And as I drove into the fading light, I whispered to myself, almost like a promise I had kept all these years. I made something of myself. Without them, for the first time, I felt complete. The past was behind me, and the future was mine. Do you think Harper was right to walk away from her mother? Let me know in the comments. If you want more stories like this, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out.